The soft hum of laughter and clinking glasses greeted me as I stepped into the brightly decorated living room. Pastel balloons bobbed gently in the air, tied to silver chairs that gleamed under the afternoon sun streaming through the bay window. My silk blouse felt smooth against my skin, yet a small ripple of nerves tugged at my chest. Baby showers had never been my thing, especially not my sister's. "Are you ready for this?" I whispered to myself, adjusting the bracelet my late husband had given me years ago, a gift I'd never taken off. I spotted her immediately. Lauren, with that familiar glint of smugness in her eyes, chatting with a group of friends. She didn't notice me at first, and part of me was grateful for the few seconds of anonymity. But then she looked my way. That smile, the one that always carried a trace of judgment, of something waiting to be said. My phone buzzed in my clutch, and I ignored it. It was just another reminder of all the messages I never replied to, of the life I kept hidden from her and everyone else. My heart thumped, a mix of anxiety and simmering pride. They didn't know how much I had rebuilt since the accident, since losing James. And yet, as I stepped forward, balancing the weight of grief and triumph in my chest, I could feel the tension crackling, the room shifting around the story that was about to unfold. It wasn't always like this. I remember the days after James passed, when the world felt sharp and hollow, as if someone had ripped the warmth out of the air. I was barely 28, thrown into a life I hadn't chosen, a life I wasn't sure I could survive. And Lauren, she didn't make it easier. "Why can't you just move on?" she had asked one afternoon, her tone casual, almost amused, as if grief was some inconvenience to her. I remember the sting of her words, the way my chest tightened, and my hands shook as I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. The lump in my throat refused to budge. It wasn't just Lauren. My parents, well-meaning in their way, had their own vision of how I should mourn, quietly, neatly, with no disruption to the rest of their perfectly arranged lives. I felt dismissed, like my pain was a shadow in a room too bright for it to exist. Every suggestion of independence, every small attempt at reclaiming my life, was met with a polite but firm resistance. It was my grandmother who saved me, in a way she probably didn't even realize. Sitting me down on her worn porch swing, she handed me a small, faded journal. "Hannah," she said, her voice soft but unwavering, "the world will always try to fit you into its mold. But you get to decide how your life looks. Start small. Start somewhere. Don't let anyone steal your story." I clutched that journal as if it were a lifeline. Every night, I wrote down plans, tiny victories, dreams I barely dared to whisper aloud. I found courage in those pages, a quiet defiance that grew with each word. The decisive moment came one chilly morning when I walked out of my parents' house with a single suitcase and a heart pounding with fear and determination. I didn't look back. Not really. I had to survive on my own terms, to prove to myself that grief didn't have to mean defeat, that life could still have light and color even after losing the person I loved most. That was the day I vowed no one, not even family, would dictate the trajectory of my life again. The first weeks on my own were brutal. I moved into a small apartment with peeling wallpaper and a faucet that leaked incessantly. Every step felt uncertain, every decision heavy with the weight of responsibility I hadn't shouldered before. But I had something no one could take: determination, and that little journal from Grandma, now full of plans and reminders that my life was mine to shape. I found a job at a small marketing firm, the kind of place where nobody notices you unless you slip up. I arrived early, stayed late, and learned everything I could. The work was exhausting, and I often questioned if I was good enough, if I'd ever be more than the fragile widow everyone seemed to assume I was. But the tiny victories began to pile up. My first campaign went better than expected. A client praised my ideas. A colleague quietly remarked that I had talent. It was during one of those long nights in the office that I met Claire Donovan, a seasoned executive who took me under her wing. She didn't pity me, didn't ask about my loss. She simply saw potential and pushed me to see it too. "You have to own your narrative, Hannah," she told me over coffee one evening, the aroma rich and grounding. "Nobody else is going to write it for you." That phrase stuck. I repeated it to myself every morning, a mantra against doubt. I poured myself into my work. I read, practiced, and networked, slowly but steadily carving out a place for myself. There were nights I cried over emails, tears of frustration and exhaustion, wondering if anyone would ever notice or if my effort would ever matter. But I kept going because giving up wasn't an option anymore. Then came the first breakthrough, a client bigger than anything I'd ever imagined. The meeting was tense. My voice shook at first, but I held my ground. By the end of the pitch, they were on board. That single success snowballed into others. Soon, I was making decisions, negotiating contracts, and quietly accumulating a reputation I never broadcasted to family or friends. I became careful about what I shared. On social media, I posted innocuous updates, a new book I'd read, a scenic photo from a weekend hike, but nothing that revealed the real progress I was making. I wanted my achievements to stand for themselves, not to feed anyone's judgment or envy. And yet, despite my quiet approach, I felt the thrill of independence, the empowerment that came from proving to myself that loss hadn't destroyed me, that I was capable of more than even I had imagined. The girl who had left her parents' house with nothing but a suitcase and a journal had become a woman building a life she could be proud of, strong, self-reliant, and unapologetically her own. The room smelled of vanilla cupcakes and fresh roses, the chatter rising in waves as guests admired gifts and took photos. I stepped carefully, heels clicking softly against the polished hardwood, my mind rehearsing the calm, controlled tone I would need. Lauren greeted me with that familiar smile, one that barely concealed curiosity and maybe a hint of superiority. "Hannah, I didn't think you'd come," she said, her voice bright, almost too cheerful, her hand brushing against mine in a touch that was more performative than warm. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, letting the words settle. I could feel eyes turning toward us, whispers rippling through the small crowd of friends and family. Perfect. They expected the grieving, fragile woman, the one who had supposedly struggled to recover. As the baby shower progressed, I allowed them a few moments of comfort, sipping my sparkling water, smiling politely, nodding at conversations, letting them assume I was still the same girl who had quietly disappeared after tragedy. Then Lauren took her seat, beaming, ready to announce the next part of the afternoon, her big surprise. I stayed poised as she called everyone closer. The room leaned in, cameras flashing, and then she dropped the bombshell. "Before we cut the cake, I just want to say something about Hannah, about James," she said, her voice loud, deliberate. Every eye turned toward me. My stomach tightened, but I stood taller, taking in the moment. Then, with a calm breath, I stepped forward. "Thank you, Lauren," I said, letting my voice ring clear and controlled. "You've always been opinionated." A few eyebrows raised. "I'd like to clarify a few things for everyone here. Since losing James, I've worked very hard, long nights, relentless effort, to build a life I'm proud of. I've become the owner of my own marketing firm, and we just signed our largest client to date. Financially, I am secure. Personally, I am stronger than I've ever been." A hush fell over the room. Lauren's face paled, and I noticed the subtle shift in her posture, the way she suddenly seemed smaller in the space. Guests exchanged wide-eyed looks, whispers of disbelief, buzzing like static. I allowed myself a small, measured smile. I wanted to share this, not to boast, but to show that grief doesn't define you, and determination can turn loss into opportunity. James would have wanted me to keep moving forward, and I have. For a moment, the air was thick with silence, broken only by the faint clink of a fork hitting a plate. I could feel the mixture of shame, guilt, and awe radiating from my sister, the very same woman who had mocked my vulnerability months ago. My quiet success had done more than secure my independence. It had rewritten how they all saw me. Then I looked around, making eye contact with a few friends who had always doubted me. Their expressions shifted from doubt to admiration. For the first time, I wasn't just Hannah Lawson, the widow. They saw Hannah Lawson, the woman who had risen from tragedy, and nobody could ever take that away. The room was still heavy with surprise, and I let that weight settle for just a moment, letting everyone fully register the truth. I could see Lauren shifting uncomfortably, the confident mask finally slipping. This was my moment, not for revenge, but for clarity and control. "I want to be honest," I began, my voice calm, measured, yet carrying a weight that made people lean in. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone. I'm here to set boundaries, for myself and for anyone who wants to have a part of my life from now on." I started with Lauren. "You've always been competitive with me, even when I was at my lowest. If you want to continue being part of my life, and by extension, your child's life, you'll need to treat me with respect and recognize that my grief, my success, and my independence are not things to belittle or manipulate. That includes no more public judgments or comparisons." I watched her swallow hard, a flicker of shame crossing her face. Then I addressed my parents, whose eyes darted nervously around the room. "Mom, Dad, I need honesty. If you want to remain close, I need you to stop projecting your expectations onto me and support me as the adult I've become. Criticism disguised as concern will no longer be acceptable." A few guests glanced at one another, and I could sense the tension between shock and admiration. I continued, my tone softening just enough to show compassion. "And for everyone here, life doesn't wait. Don't let jealousy, bitterness, or doubt hold you back. Pursue your passions, nurture your relationships, and respect the journeys of others, even when it's inconvenient." I could feel the room absorbing each word. The power had shifted subtly, effortlessly. I wasn't angry, I was clear. I was firm. I was in control. Then I added, almost as an afterthought, a small smile tugging at my lips. "I care about all of you, but caring doesn't mean I'll allow old patterns to repeat. My life is mine. My late husband's memory is mine. And the happiness I've fought so hard to reclaim is not negotiable." I could see Lauren nodding slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the truth she couldn't argue with. My parents, too, shifted, recognizing the woman I had become, not the girl they had once underestimated. For the first time, I felt the weight lift. I wasn't just defending myself. I was empowering everyone else in the room to face their own truths while protecting the life I had rebuilt. It was a delicate balance, but one I had earned. In that moment, I realized that strength isn't about crushing others. It's about standing firm, offering a chance for growth, and refusing to compromise the boundaries that safeguard your heart. The days that followed the baby shower were quieter, softer, but unmistakably different. Lauren reached out, not with the same smugness, but with a tentative honesty I hadn't expected. She asked questions about my work, about how I'd rebuilt my life, and even offered a sincere apology for the things she had said in the past. It was small, but it felt real. My parents began to adjust too. Conversations that once carried unspoken judgment now held curiosity and cautious respect. I could see them recalibrating, learning to appreciate me for the woman I had become rather than the girl they once thought they knew. It wasn't perfect, healing rarely is. But it was progress, and I allowed myself to savor it without guilt. One evening, I sat on my apartment balcony, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. In my hands was the faded journal my grandmother had given me years ago. I traced the edges of the pages, worn from years of notes and reflections. It was a reminder of where I had started, the small spark that had grown into a fire capable of carrying me through grief, struggle, and eventual triumph. I thought about James, about his quiet faith in me that had never wavered. I thought about the countless nights I had questioned myself, and the long, exhausting days where I had chosen persistence over despair. Every step, every decision, had led to this, an unshakable sense of self, a life rebuilt with intention and strength. And as I closed the journal, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. My journey had been painful, yes, but it had also been transformative. I had discovered resilience, forged independence, and learned the delicate art of blending compassion with firmness. My relationships were shifting, my boundaries respected, and my future stretched wide with possibility. Standing there, looking out at the city, I realized that true power isn't just about success or wealth. It's about reclaiming your story, honoring your grief, and moving forward on your own terms. And in that moment, I could say without hesitation, I am not who I was yesterday, nor who anyone else expected me to be. I am strong, I am whole, and my life, my story, is mine to live. A soft breeze stirred, carrying the faint scent of roses from the shower days ago, and I let myself smile. The past had shaped me, but it did not define me. I was Hannah Lawson, and finally I was free.